Imagine you're an executive at Fox Studios in 1990. You own the IP to the Alien films, which has brought you two major successes, and now you feel like it's time for a third. The directors of the previous Alien films have now become two of the biggest names in Hollywood, so finding the director for this project has more pressure on it than usual. You're able to get some of the same writers as the first two films, and Sigourney Weaver has now agreed to reprise her role as Ripley. And after sitting through hundreds of potential directors, you will land on a young director named David Fincher, who up until that point had only directed music videos. You pick Fincher because of his expertise in practical and special effects, and despite this being his first feature film, you believe in him, and you're ready to give him all the creative freedoms he needs to create another hit for the studio. Sounds good, right? Yeah, that didn't happen. I mean, everything about Fincher being picked for the movie was, but the whole creative freedom for the betterment of the film, yeah, that was bullshit. Fox didn't look at Fincher as a potential hitmaker, but an unknown director with no power to stop them from overtaking the whole project creatively. And so what is to this day known as arguably the most torturous movie production started. As soon as the ink was dry on the contract, Fincher began reworking the screenplay with writer Rex Pickett. They finished revising the script and Fox hated it. It was too long and too expensive, so they went back to the original writing team to rework it. Eventually the script would be done and the studio was happy with it, but Fincher wasn't. So now as production was beginning, Fincher every single day was fighting with the studio to change aspects of the screenplay and story. Without a day of shooting, Fox had already spent $7 million on the film and were quickly growing angry at Fincher. But then shooting began, and things went from bad to worse.
It's amazing to me that Fox is the #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
See, everyone loved Fincher on set. The actors, the crew, the lighting staff, except for the fucking executives. So inside Pinewood Studios, where the film was shot, it became an inside war between Fincher and the film's lead, Sigourney Weaver, versus everyone that was funding the film. The film's release date was set in stone and the studio wasn't willing to delay. They were already way over budget, and with a very frail screenplay that the studio as well as Fincher constantly wanted to change, the money spent only ballooned. Scenes set to be shot would be cancelled just a day before scheduled. Days on set became longer as Fincher tried to figure out what the execs were asking of him and what he even had to film with. This all became too much for Fincher, who went to the studio and asked them to take his name off the film because he wanted to quit. Surprisingly, the studio wanted him to stay, so they halted production and told Fincher to make a rough cut of the film from what was already filmed up until that point, and continue production after that. Fincher came back to Fox with a 3-hour-long film. Fox was not happy. Fox told Fincher he had to cut a lot of the film out, including many violent scenes Fincher was passionate about. Whilst Fincher at that point only thought they needed to shoot one more scene for the film, the ending scene, the studio was now asking him to reshoot a big percentage of the film. However, Fincher was able to finish the rest of the shooting without much trouble, and then came actually editing the film. Fincher was halfway through editing the film when he was notified by Fox that they'll only accept a cut that's under 2 hours long. And if you remember, Fincher's original cut was 3 hours long, and at that point, Fincher just quit. He said that the studio can have all the power they want over editing, and he doesn't want anything to do with the film going forward. The film was edited by the studio and released on May 22nd, 1992. The film was a commercial and critical flop, and Fincher took a majority of the blame from critics. Outside of one promotional interview, Fincher didn't comment on he didn't attend the premiere, and to this day, he barely talks about the film. But when he does, he doesn't have many nice things to say. Fincher went back to directing music videos for another 2 years, but then to his surprise, he was offered another movie. Fincher's friend Andrew Walker had finished a screenplay to his crime thriller called Seven, and dropped it on Fincher's desk, asking him to direct. Fincher and Walker pitched the movie to New Line Cinema, and despite the failure of Alien 3, Fincher was able to get another chance at directing a feature. With the studio's belief, the film was able to attract a star-studded cast and soon began production. This film, despite having the ups and downs of every film production, went way smoother than Alien 3, and the studio was far more lenient with the violence and horror in Fincher's film. The film was finished smoothly and released to amazing reviews and was a commercial miracle, making $328 million. Fincher, who just a few years ago made the biggest disappointment in Hollywood, was now looked at as one of the best up-and-comers the industry has. And for the next 16 years, Fincher would go on one of the best directorial runs ever. It's after the release of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo in 2011 where Fincher's career would take a pivotal change, as he would start his working relationship with Netflix. See, Netflix was launching their original show starring Kevin Spacey, House of Cards. They approached Fincher to direct a few episodes of the show and executively produce the project. Fincher agreed and directed 2 episodes of the first season. The show was a hit, arguably Netflix's biggest to this day. Fincher continued to produce the show up until Kevin Spacey couldn't keep his hands outside of other people's pants. The show ended. But the most important part is that this started Fincher's long-lasting relationship with Netflix. Within the last 10 years, major directors have found their homes on streaming sites as their new producers for their newest films. Martin Scorsese and David Fincher being the 2 biggest examples. Scorsese set up a deal with Netflix to make his masterpiece The Irishman, and for his next film, Killers of the Flower Moon, which by the way is based on a really good book, I would recommend you reading it. It premiered on Apple TV. Fincher, after his relationship with Netflix started with House of Cards, he would go on to direct his next film, Gone Girl, with Fox, but then would return to Netflix as he would produce and direct 7 episodes of Mindhunter. He would then continue producing Netflix originals with the show Love, Death, and Robots, where he would even direct an episode. It then came out that Fincher would be directing his next feature, Mank, with Netflix. Mank was a critical success and won 2 Oscars. A couple years later, Fincher started working on his next feature, The Killer, also with Netflix. And it was rewatching The Killer that I thought of this video. Fincher started his career in arguably the worst hand a director could be given with a major picture. He was blamed for the studio meddling with a film he was really passionate for. It's really easy for a director to become disgruntled and want to quit after this, but Fincher didn't. He continued grinding on music videos and was finally given another chance and never looked back. He's become one of the best directors of this generation, and now he's sitting comfortably on a desk at Netflix HQ creating the art he wants to. He has literally gone from powerless to having all the power in the world to create what he wants at Netflix. And I don't think there's a more deserving director in the last 20 years, outside of maybe Tarantino, but he's always had power with his productions. But tell me what you think in the comments. What's your favorite Fincher film?
I think people are perverts.